Welcome to the final day of PGS7 Grand Finals review. I'm going to put the points on the screen, and going into our last 6 games, we are going to begin with Miramar. Straight into our first game, we have a crater field zone, which is so annoying for competitive players because everyone knows how absurd these rocks can be. All of these areas are very difficult to rotate, as well as church and this rock. So there's plenty of rocks in this zone, meaning that teams are going to find it difficult to play for multiple endings. I think most teams are going to sit here and pick one. So we have Falcons setting up for the east ending, we have 17 setting up for the south ending, and we have DNF setting up for the northeast ending. So all of our teams aren't really going to rotate that much until circle 2, and they're all happy with their positions. The only thing that really is happening here is DNF is preparing for an emergency pickup for the phase 2. With our Zone 2 shift, most competitive players will now understand where the game is likely to end, and I only say that because the next phase will shift rocks out afterwards, so there's only actually a few amount of spots that this zone can end. Of course, it can end in anywhere realistically, but in terms of frequency and probabilities, it is more likely to end in areas either east of Cantera, in Crater Fields, or somewhere in Pozo. So there are our main 3 endings here. And all the teams are aware of those main 3 endings. We have Falcons doing a send to try and get into Pozo for the Pozo ending, and unfortunately they lose kickstart to Perfectix, which is unfortunate for them. We do end up actually having DNF using that e-pickup and coming all the way to the southwest side of the zone, securing some vehicles as well as getting on Salute up into the high ground. BB is contesting this, but nothing happening quite yet. 17 also sitting on the south side of the zone, maintaining that high ground control to get vision into Pozo, and keeping their options open in the case of other shifts. But in terms of what our other team is doing, DNF is preparing for a fight on BB, and that is what they are focusing on right here. So Salute has a great little hidey spot up on the rocks, while the rest of DNF prepare to attack the compound. However, BB, a very slow-paced team, and they don't really take any risks here, and as there's no entry knock, DNF respect the compound and wait for zone pop. And as zone pops, you can see Salute starts running north, preparing for that next shift, and Salute is most likely calling that Alcantara looks free as DNF begins to go back to cars. In terms of the positioning of our other teams on this shift, 17 choose to wrap all the way around zone, and they actually get into a fight with Furia, so Haven takes one of 17 out. But 17 not quite happy with that, so they kill Haven. We have DNF securing all of Cantera here, which they're quite happy with. Falcons, the last team inside Pozo, and they're going to stay there for a little bit as well. 17 continue fighting Fury here and lose another player, and you have Salute calling deal over as they try to clean up this fight. 17 sends their solo into the compound. Furia is wiped. But after this shift really here, there's not much for them to do, and they decide to try and get to a shack, and unfortunately die in the process. When this southern garage or warehouse, it's probably better to say it's a warehouse, ends up re-crashing, and that is because TKL is holding a very ballsy 2-2 split here, and as they leave to regroup, both the warehouse and BB, so TE and BB, contest for this compound, which gives Falcons a beautiful opportunity to go and play into this bowl just across the road. They pull up on Salute to pressure him first, and once they have done so, they go into the bowl. The problem with this bowl, however, is once DNF get this next shift here, they now know that they realistically have no threats, as Deal is holding the north and Salute is holding the south, and it's very difficult for teams to really get towards them. So because they know this, they can start sending their players to peek into Falcons, as well as BB not able to watch these angles very much because they have a 3-man of Begopar underneath them, as well as Too Hot back at the warehouse. So DNF is able to clean up Tig and Hwin. Shrimsy runs across the road, at least I think he's in the shack here. Twire is slightly off in terms of positioning, but as you can see, DNF has cleared 2 of Falcons for free, essentially. They get 1 player knocked, they just carry him back and res. So DNF cleaning up points, a really consistent team when it comes to points maximization, so they're always going to look to get as many points as they can. Shrimsy ends up going across the road once DNF get closer to him. I'm not really sure how he did this, I'd have to watch the official games, But hey, he has survived for slightly longer. Unfortunately for him, once this next zone pops and Bagopar has to start going into the zone, they do end up spotting him out and killing him. Despite having decent shifts all the game and having a great previous shift, DNF on this shift is basically screwed. And the reason I say that is because no matter what happens here, TKL are going to slot into the northwest side of the zone. We have Forest Gaming as well, also with full LOS onto their drive, as well as Bagopar having full LOS onto anything they want to go play. So DNF here, they're dead, and that's exactly what happens. Onto game 2 here, we have a Cruz to Valle center zone, so this is not necessarily good for any of our 3 teams. You know, decent priority here. DNF maybe edging out slightly over 17 and Falcons, but our teams are going to rotate and DNF slotting into the south side, 17 taking the direct road all the way into the southwest side, and they're quite happy with their split here, so they're not really going to move around too much. Something to note here, Falcons with a fantastic rotate in my opinion. They are able to get all the way up to Tierra Bronca Hill, which gives them a good amount of vision and control onto the center portions of the zone. So I do think this is a really good rotate from them, and they're going to be able to get high ground positions for phase 2 if it does shift away from them, which will give them some good information. But we do have our DNF split on the south, 17 just to their west, and Falcons on the north. Phase 2 about to pop. Keep in mind, guys, every time a zone is about to pop, all of these professional players are in their cars ready to rotate. So the second zone pops, we have Falcons needing to make a decision. DNF and 17 quite happy just to sit here. These are some of the common endings, so both of them are just going to hold their split or at least regroup onto the more central one. Falcons are able to use their high ground to slot themselves in above Cruz to Valle. And from here, they can slowly pressure this prior compound of T5, and they successfully do so with T5 leaving, and they end up getting one of the kills and controlling this zone. So with our next shift as well, we can see DNF sending Gooman out to have a look at this warehouse to see what's going on. But Pero ends up regrouping onto the central warehouse, which gives Falcons good information, and they backfill pretty much immediately into the east compound. 17 still holding their spread, able to funnel New Happy away from them, which creates heaps of space on their south as no one is now behind them except for DNF on their east. Right before zone pops, Pero and TE actually end up getting into a fight, and this ends up giving Falcons an opportunity to take a 4v3 in which they do breach the warehouse and they kill every one of Pero and only lose Kick, which is a pretty good trade here. Falcons don't really have any good decisions or sends to make this zone, so I think, you know, this is the best case outcome for them. The only problem with this is that DNF also has information on kill feed and are going to start taking the surrounding buildings around Falcons, and DNF is also a 4-man. 17 here on the south, happy just to chill. They have their, we call this car wash, and also it's compound to the west, so they're happy just to sit here. They do end up actually regrouping on the west when Bagopar makes some noise as they want to enforce the west side of this compound, which is exactly what they do, and they're quite happy to sit here and wait for zone pop. This endgame shift here, very bad for all 3 of our teams, so DNF, 17, and Falcons all out of zones. 17 definitely in the most dominant position here, and the reason I say that is because they know that this is clear, and if they are able to control both these compounds, it does give them a nice line through the road. We also have Falcons and DNF seeing this zone, and they both understand that the only way they're going to make it into the next zone is by killing each other, essentially, as all they can do after that is head into the road. So both these teams are going to force the fight hard, which is exactly what ends up happening. Tig gets a knock onto Heaven, I think it was Tig, pretty sure it was, and they end up fighting in the blue with DNF just managing to outlive Tig, which it was a very close fight. If you watch on the stream, it was very, very close. However, that basically means that DNF is out, Falcons are out, and 17 has control of the road, which will be very influential for the future zones. 17 controlling the road, watching Forest go in front of them. They go and kill Forest. They end up spotting out Deal after he knocks Xiaobei as well. On this next shift, they look for an entry knock onto New Happy. They manage to find it, as well as BGP getting a second one. So they get free entry into that bowl as a 3-man, and they set up a nice 3-1. They lose Little Ghost here to New Happy in the field, but Xiaowu clears him up. So 17 as a 3-man on the east side of the zone here. This next shift very difficult as BB has full control, but 17 actually make a very creative play here, trying to go all the way around with the idea that if they can wait for this BB player to be out, they can actually have a pretty solid 3v3. The only problem with this play is that Xiaowu was not able to cover the other 3 of BB as much as he maybe could have. I'm not really sure what his situation was. They didn't show his perspective that much, but a good effort from 17 here and able to get second in this game. Onto Tego, we have another Godok zone. These seem to be really common in this patch, not sure why. So as you can imagine, DNF is going to have a fantastic split here, controlling just a stupid amount of space. Falcons looting Harpo, pressuring this solo off, and they end up actually getting a really good split too, with 2 on the hill and 2 in this compound, so a very good spot for them. As far as 17 crossing over the bridge and controlling the east, which is a very strong split for them as well in terms of any northeast and east shifts here. Zone 2 about to pop, and we're going to have some decisions being made. DNF end up regrouping onto their compound, as well as Falcons grouping up on their south before they start extending out west a little bit. We have 17 wrapping all the way south, and look how patient they are. They're staying in the blue. They're really not pressuring or rushing any fights they don't have to. So Falcons set up, DNF set up, and 17 taking their time, even going into blue. With this next shift, however, 17 turns back around. They head over east and start heading towards Palace Hill. And we have Falcons doing a send into Godok. Tig does get knocked out of the car. However, they pick him up and carry him into the zone, which means that Falcons are a 4-man in the center of zone, which is awesome news for them. 17 setting up on the Palace Hill and find out that this compound is clear through some drive scouts and audio information. DNF spread out on the west side of zone, and with our next shift we can tell it's a Godok zone. So very, very bad shift here for DNF. They're going to have a lot of either people to kill, or they're going to have to make a send. 17 with a great shift here as they have no one in front of them, so they're going to be able to get quite deep into Godok. And of course Falcons with a great shift here as their dead center. We can observe 17 begin to work into the city, so they're going to be able to get into some of the central spots of the city. DNF trying to fight TKL on the southwest side. The only problem here is they are in a field with people third-partying them, so they do end up losing a few players in their pursuit of these kills. And from here they're in a very rough spot as they are outside of zone with people shooting them the whole time. Note also Falcons centered up again, and they're in a great spot here. 17 also centering up even more. Salute ends up going down shortly after, as he is just a solo in a field. So this next shift, 17 in a great spot, Falcons in a great spot, and Salute ends up dying very shortly. We have our city ending here, so 17 in a great spot as well as Falcons. And something I'm interested in, as I think that Falcons may have done this, is Falcons were in these buildings, and by securing these buildings they have now information if anyone does end up taking their old buildings. So they're able to herd a lot of the players away, so New Happy does end up going further east, which gives Falcons that there's information that there shouldn't really be anyone at their old compound, because they were the ones who went there, and I'm sure they're able to keep a decent amount of info. So if there are people there, probably a very weak team. So Falcons doing so, they go back to their old spot, clear a solo, continue working into zone, and look at them. They continue going deeper and deeper, clearing building by building. 17 in a tricky situation as they have Furia right next to them, as well as New Happy. So lots of people pressuring 17 here, and Falcons playing it nice and slow. Very, very patient game here from Falcons, and they do end up killing BB and closing out the game shortly after. So very good game here for Falcons. Not many kills, but they do get a win, which is 10 placements. With 3 games left, I'll whack the scoreboard up on to the screen. But zone, pretty central zone here. 17, DNF, and Falcons are all going to slot in pretty much right next to each other. So each of our teams quite happy with their spots. Falcons with a very nice 2-2 split. 17 with a good amount of space on the center. And DNF controlling all of the north and a decent chunk of the northeast as well. So pretty good spots for all 3 of our teams in this phase 1. Phase 2 here, pretty boring. Good zone for all of our teams. So Falcons regroup on their goated compound, 17 tighten up their split, and DNF continue to control all the space. Phase 3, another good shift for all of our teams, all of them still in, 17 regrouping in the compound now, really tightening up. DNF also, accepting they can't hold too much space, and they commit to the north side. Now this next shift is going to be very important, and Falcons and DNF very, very happy with this shift here. 17 not very happy. They end up sending Little Ghost towards these ridges. However, Kiss is able to get there first, but it's actually Bestia who manages to team shot Little Ghost here. Once a Little Ghost is knocked, 17 send 2 people to try and res them. However, Kiss has spoiled and manages to knock both of these players, which is pretty impressive. And Xiaowu is the last player remaining, and he comes out to the ridges to try and salvage anything he can, really, which he is unable to do so. So that is 17 dead, and DNF and Falcons the last 2 teams here, and both of them are just going to hold their space until zone pops. This is an important shift here, and Falcons are still inside their compound, as well as DNF having the entire north ridgeline in. As far as game plans go, Falcons are actually in a great spot despite being barely in, and that is because they are going to be able to sweep a lot of this terrain because of the control that this compound gives them. So both teams are going to do pretty much nothing until they need to, but they both have good positions and good game plans for the late game. As we can see, Falcons begin running out to start clearing everything southwest here, and as you can tell, Falcons absolutely steamrolled through the lobby. As if you want to go watch the VOD, I highly recommend it, as Falcons were extremely aggressive and managed to carry their momentum and kill a lot of people in this game. So as you can see, the clearing zone is no longer in on their compound, so they commit to their south play. They really stall here, revive kick, reset and relax, and they go again. Even when this terrible zone shifts away from them, they continue pushing and killing a Bego Pa. A very, very disciplined and well played game here to clear everyone. They utilize their momentum, carry Shrimzy into zone. Teague ends up getting knock as well as H1, but Kick and Shrimzy do actually manage to get into the zone, and from here they actually managed to win this game. Pretty big throw in my opinion from TKL. As you can see, they had a pretty good spot as 4-man in these containers, and when they went to go kill Deal, it did end up turning south when DNF wrapped them, and they end up losing 2, which is really not what you want to see. But anyway, Falcons with a huge kill game and really climbing up the leaderboards after this game. For our first Orangle, we have a Gaka zone. Good priority for 17 here. They're going to slot into a pretty aggressive and greedy split, but very, very powerful split for 17 here. DNF also setting up on the north side, not able to get too central, but also controlling a decent amount of compounds, as well as the high ground of Everest. Falcons coming in from shelter and taking ruins, and all the teams are going to wait for C2. For the first time in a while here, our C2 shift does not favor any of our teams necessarily. So DNF slot himself into Gaka, 17 slot himself into the east side of zone, and Falcons managed to get slightly deeper with a north split. However, DNF definitely the winners of R3 here, as they are able to secure this low ground compound, which gives them a huge portion of zone control. As you can see, their split is very, very aggressive and controls a good amount of space, while 17 and Falcons are forced to stay into a small amount of terrain. With our next zone popping, I do want to take some more time on this zone because all 3 of our teams actually make really, really high quality decisions here. So we're going to focus on Falcons first, and Falcons go out to the west. They managed to pick 2 of Furia off before pick-upping into the central bowls. We remember talking about these bowls in plenty of the games. It's a very solid spot, so they do not really have any chance of rotating into this position without losing players, or at least a high chance of losing players. So a really good play from Falcons here, great pickup. In terms of what our other teams did, 17 with a fantastic wrap all the way around south. They slow play, use information, and set themselves up into zone before spreading out even further west. And on this next zone here, really you can see how this wrap has paid off for them, and they're able to control a good amount of space. And now for DNF, and what DNF end up doing. DNF slot themselves in very slowly into the east side, using their control to maintain their space in the northeast section of the zone. However, once they hear this team, TKL and TE, fighting at the yellows, they actually send in front of them and take the rocks and wood piles right in front of them. So this is a really, really high quality decision from DNF, as they're able to bypass all of this fighting while setting up inside zone, which means that they're going to just be able to hold these teams from zone in the future. Going back to 17 here, because it is really unfortunate, a very, very patient and well thought out rat play from his 77 over here. He manages to pick one of Forest up. The only problem here is he does end up dying just as Little Ghost and Xiaobei end up grouping up on him, which kind of sucks because I do think that if this was not the case, I think 17 probably could have won this game. But as far as positioning goes, all of our teams have managed to slot themselves into pretty good spots. As we start to watch the zone unfold, we can see that DNF preparing to kill TE on the north with a really good spread of resources, so they're going to be able to clean this up pretty easily. As far as Falcons go, Falcons are in a rough position, as we remember looking back. These bowls are really solid. The only problem is that everyone is going to fight into the bowls. So this compound, a 2-man of E-Arena, unfortunately they get wiped by a 4-man of BB. And the reason that's unfortunate, because if a 4-man is pushing Falcons from the west with a 2-man pushing from the east, it's going to be really, really tricky for Falcons to hold this spot, as they're simply going to be overwhelmed by the amount of threats they have to deal with. 17 slot himself into the west side of zone, as well as Pero head into the bowls. So 17 quite happy to sit here. DNF has finished their fight, and with this next shift here, 17 super fed, and they're quite happy to relax and just do nothing. DNF have a good play. They're going to pull up and try and clear Pero, and Falcons are now in a position where they really have to prepare for their pushes. So as you can see, Falcons split basically 2-2, and they're in a position where they really can't do that much. So once Falcons lose one player and Tig goes down, it's pretty much game over from there. So Shrimsy picking up a few more kills. DNF did end up going and wiping Pero over here, with Salute heading into the field. A good off angle from Salute makes it very easy for DNF to figure this out. As you can see, 17 also coming to investigate, but it's just not a fight that they are willing to take. So our last two teams alive now are DNF and 17. With this next zone shift here, we can see DNF has full control of the zone, and since there is no one alive, it's a 4v3 and they have full control. This is why I mentioned that if 17 was a 4-man, I do think they would have been able to do a little bit more when DNF fought Pero, but unfortunately that is how the cookie crumbles sometimes. So as far as our end game goes, 17 played it really well, but the high ground from Salute and Heaven just made it really difficult for 17 to win this game. With our very final game of PGS7 Grand Finals, I'm going to put the points up on the screen so you can see how close of a game this really was. But with our first zone centering on Ferry Pier, we can see 17 taking a very quick timing, leaving Pachinki at 3 minutes, which is pretty quick. You know, they're not looting that much. And they managed to get themselves all of the compounds east of Ferry Pier. So they are accidentally, I guess you could say, setting up for a military shift, which would have been crazy, but that was not the case. Spoilers. But 17, a pretty decent split. Some rotate that I do want to point out is DNF actually managed to do a send from Rolls all the way into this bunker, which I'm very surprised that New Happy is not playing for this bunker, which is honestly the only reason, or at least one of the reasons, why DNF made this game so intense, because they were able to get this fantastic position in Circle 1. As far as Falcons going, Falcons setting up on the east side. I think they were camping, or maybe... I'm honestly not sure what their plan was here, but they're making sure their east is clear. I do think they have a few decent sends or positions they can play to, so not the worst to do this here. When they start hearing fights in Pachinki, they get their cars and prepare to try and pick up some points. So I think they end up getting 1 or 2 points from this, and then they slot themselves into the east or northeast side of the zone. Meanwhile, during this period on phase 2 pop, 17 send directly into Ferry Pier. Great send from them here, preparing for a line, and the idea here is that they are going to pull up underneath. So when we really zoom out here and look at the lines they do have pretty solid lines into this central portions of the zone. So a very good spot here for 17, as well as a good spot from DNF here. With zone about to pop here, Falcons hitting a pre-send from the north, and a very, very good shift here for 17 and DNF. That's why the game was so interesting, as both of our teams in the top 3 had fantastic zone pops. So you can see DNF regrouping and making sure they're solidified, as well as 17 controlling the main barn to make sure they secure their lines. As they also know, guys, remember, we have phase 4 happening next shift, which is going to try and eliminate as much water as humanly possible. So very, very solid spot for 17 and DNF here. As far as Falcons do a send, and unfortunately for them on the drive, because 17 is so stacked on this compound, they do end up losing Shrimsy out of the rotate, and this is possibly the worst case scenario for them, as 17 is below them on the leaderboard and they know that they need to kill Falcons. So all that 17 need to do now is really sit tight and make sure that they track Falcons' movements and try and harass them as much as possible. It's going to be really difficult for Falcons to get any good positions with 17 going to control the main position as well as keeping track on where they're going. So Falcons now in a position where their main competitor knows exactly where they are, and they're also a 3-man. So really, really rough position here for Falcons, and it is unfortunate that 17 regrouped at the time they did, because I think if they made it here as 4, they actually would have had a fighting chance in this game. With our final zone starting to close, we have a shift that eliminates as much water as humanly possible. Falcons, 17, and DNF all inside the zone here. DNF and 17 simply going to sit tight and not do anything. They do not want to lose anyone for free. Falcons start moving through Ferry Pier as they know it's going to be really, really difficult for them to fight this barn as a 3-man, so they're going to start working through in hopes that they can get deeper into the zone on the east-hand side of. Anyway, the next shift does pop, and DNF again in holding their east and controlling their space with 17. I stuttered there. I fucking stuttered there. With our next zone pop here, we have 17, fantastic spot, DNF, fantastic spot, and of course, Falcons on the south in a rough position as 17 has regrouped on the central building, which is going to make their life very, very difficult in terms of where they can go, as they're going to have to go east, because fighting this barn as a 4-man is going to be really, really tricky. So DNF setting up nice and tight, 17 nice and tight. Falcons begin to move through Ferry Pier, and on this next shift, and an entry knock onto one of EA, Falcons begin to try and collect as many points as they can here. So they send H-Win and Kick nice and close, but unfortunately for them, we had Neurons, who was an absolute Navy SEAL and swam through the water. It caused a lot of troubles for Falcons as he was able to flank Tig. H-Win doesn't end up going down, but Tig, being the anchor, being taken down, the game is pretty much over for Falcons here. And they are dead as Kick managed to pick up one more point, but dies in the blue. One thing that really did mess this game, and I was heartbroken to see this, was Draft King manages to sneak into DNF's bowls, and he does end up taking Gooman down, which is really, really rough for DNF. I think they honestly would have won this tournament if they had all 4 players up, but that is how the cookie crumbles, and DNF lose one of their players, but end up clearing the solo out. But really, really rough for them. As we can see, 17 begin to make their play. They start sweeping out west as they hear a big team fight happening between TKL and TE, and they manage to sweep out and clear that, which makes their position on the west quite solid, and from here they just sit tight and hold their zone. The last 2 solos end up dying, and now we just have a 4v3 with our first place and second place team. With all our solos dead now, we can see that DNF controlling as many angles as they can. They know they are 3, so the only way they're going to win is by out-angling 17. But 17, a very, very patient team. They are slow playing on the west, trying to gather information. They end up spotting out Salute here, but unfortunately for them, the angles that Heaven is able to see, as well as Salute being able to stall quite well, makes it very difficult. So once they cannot clear Salute, 17 end up going to try and create a diversion and wrap all the way north. But for them, when the next zone does end up popping, they know that this terrain in the central area here is very, very difficult, because DNF will be able to suffocate them. Deal holding all the way east, still scared of that wrap, and that is possibly the detriment of DNF, as Salute continues his edge play, and he knocks Little Ghost, but in return he does get knocked to a blue zone. If you guys watch that on the stream, it was extremely close, and if he didn't get knocked there, I think the game was over. But Deal stalling for a little bit too long allows 17 to utilize this timing and use their numbers to overwhelm all of DNF, and 17 ends up winning this tournament off the back of a final win in the last game. Hope you guys enjoyed this series. I'm only going to do it for the next Grand Finals. I think group stage is just a bit too much, but I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm not really fussed if these videos don't get too many views, because they are purely meant to be educational from a macro perspective. So I hope you guys really enjoyed, and be sure to watch PGS 8, as all the best teams will be playing in that one too.